Did you see my past tutorial on how to make decoupage jewelry using origami paper and pre-cut wood planks? The earrings turned out cute. But what if you could make these even faster with precision cutting? Hi, my name is Pearl and I'm the beadinggem. This tutorial shows you all the tips and tricks for making decoupage jewelry using a laser cutter. I will demonstrate how to quickly prep and color your wood, as well as the use of different glues and sealants. The laser cutter I'm using happens to be the xTOOLM1 hybrid cutter. Please check out my channel for more in-depth information about this model. First, pre-sand all your wood pieces. You can do this by hand with sandpaper or an electric sander. I used 3mm basswood for this project. All the supplies and files I used are listed in the description box below. For coloring wood, I use either acrylic paint or water-based wood stain from the Saman brand. You can either use brushes or sponge applicators. I prefer the latter. You can see how I use the applicator when it becomes drier to go back over the more heavily applied areas to remove excess stain. Be sure to also color the back of the wood sheet if you're making studs or complementary colored wood pieces. Try and apply the black stain lightly, as it can obscure wood grain. Use feathery strokes and move the applicator to and fro. You can also use a crunched up paper towel to take off some of the stain. The decoupage paper I use is printed origami paper. Not all the patterns are suitable for jewelry. I chose those which have smaller design elements. I've listed where I got the origami paper in the description box below. The workhorse for gluing and sealing is good old Mod Podge. But do watch on, as I also tested out 2 other products with different results. I tried both, but prefer to use a sponge applicator over a brush. A good tip is to dampen the sponge applicator before use to reduce visible stroke marks. You can apply the Mod Podge to the paper or to the wood, as I did later in the video. It doesn't matter which way, so long as there's enough glue and all the creases are smoothed out, either with some kind of tool or with fingers. I found it more effective to do it with fingers. And once that is done, let everything dry. You'll notice that the thin paper is harder to handle, so be careful. If you have an xTOOL laser cutter like I do, I highly recommend the Air Assist accessory, which is turned on during the laser cutting. This greatly reduces any laser scorching. You do not want any burn marks on the applied decoupage paper. Remember to open the exhaust vent window or turn on the air filter machine if you have one, as well as the air assist before laser cutting. This project works with prism rods, if that is what you have. I have the honeycomb bed and riser unit. The honeycomb bed allows me to use the magnetic metal clamps which holds down the wood sheet. This is useful if the wood sheet is slightly warped. Having the wood as flat as possible helps, as the laser needs to be in focus everywhere it goes. You can also cut out small pieces of the pattern elements you want rather than use the whole sheet of origami paper. This saves on wood. You can also use a paper punch in a size larger than what you will be laser cutting. This also helps isolate the design you want. Hold the paper punch upside down to see where you're punching out. You can see from the outlines some of the shapes I used for this project. The SVG files are available in my Etsy store. The results look great. The veneer edge of the basswood cutouts can also be stained if that is what you prefer. As with my previous decoupage tutorial, I use furniture markers to color the edges. The back does not need to be colored because the wood sheet was already stained prior to laser cutting. Whether you color over the edges to get a frame look or not is entirely up to you. I also use decoupage glue, which I found to be too watery. This is because decoupage glue is made for thicker decoupage paper, so it's not quite appropriate for the thin origami paper I was using. Now I had to apply a couple of coats of sealant with every single piece, the fronts, the backs, and the edges. This step is necessary if colored edges and the framing steps were added with the furniture marker. But it was too laborious and messy for jewelry pieces, which I did not want to add this extra coloring. So hang on and see what we can do to save time. The back of the wood sheet was stained as before. Then Mod Podge was used to apply the origami paper. You can see I tried out 2 different tools to press down the paper smoothly. The small cutouts were also applied in the same way. I had great success using this water-based varnish to coat the top of the glued-on paper. There was almost no sponge applicator marks, unlike the Mod Podge or Decoupage glue. Once dried, the wood sheet can then be laser cut, and the only sealing you will have to do by hand are the edges. It's not wrong to use Mod Podge if that is all you have. You do have to look very closely to see the difference between the streaks on the Mod Podge pieces versus the Saman water-based varnish. The time-saving tip is to seal the top of the decoupage paper before laser cutting. Also stain or color and seal both sides of the leftover wood to make studs. You can also choose to add dimension to the finished decoupage jewelry. I will show you two alternatives and their pros and cons. The first is Mod Podge's Dimensional Magic. This is suitable for those who do not want to work with resin. There's no mixing of parts. You just apply where you need it. Try not to get any down the holes. Dimensional Magic will clear on drying. The second alternative is epoxy resin. I recommend Little Windows Brilliant Resin, which is a safe jewelry grade resin to use. I applied the resin onto the wood pieces placed on top of the Little Windows silicone doming tray. Again, carefully avoiding the holes and not overloading, which could lead to overflowing. Studs are tricky as they are so small. They are unstable on the silicone doming tray. I had to use a silicone scrubbing pad, which you can buy from the dollar store. This keeps the studs flat. It was difficult and occasionally near impossible to avoid the holes. You'll also notice that Dimensional Magic can generate bubbles just like resin, so do pop them before curing. Some of the studs after curing show what happens when the resin or Dimensional Magic leaks through the holes. The excess bits can be carefully removed. It was easier to cut off and remove the excess Dimensional Magic. It took time and effort shaving with a small craft knife to remove the excess resin from the studs. Larger pieces were not an issue, but I had trouble with shapes with inside curves like these butterflies. The resin consistently overflowed at one inside point and there were little dots of resin. So not only did I have to shave off the excess with the craft knife, but also had to recolor the backs. I also applied more resin to the backs to cover up. Note that Brilliant Resin is a doming resin, so it is more raised than Dimensional Magic. Resin makes paper go translucent, so if you're going to use resin, make sure the decoupage piece is properly sealed with Mod Podge before applying the resin. I had no such trouble with Dimensional Magic. The decoupage jewelry looks good with or without finishes like resin or Dimensional Magic. Add metal findings and you are done. Shown here are my favorites from this project. I hope you will have fun making your own. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more tutorials in the future. Also check out my blog beadinggem.com for even more tutorials, tips, and all sorts of inspirations. See you later.